She was called a filthy old hag at her own son's party, so she sold the house from under him. If you enjoy stories about karma, family betrayal, and quiet revenge, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. Now let's get into it. Rose had lived in the same house for 30 years. It was a modest but beautiful 2-story home with a wraparound porch, a garden she had built with her own hands, and a kitchen island where she had made thousands of family dinners. She had raised her son Trevor in that house. She had buried her husband from that house. Every wall held a memory, and every memory belonged to her. 6 months before the night that changed everything, Trevor and his wife Julie had moved in. They said it was temporary. They said they were saving money to buy a home of their own in an exclusive neighborhood across town, the kind of neighborhood with iron gates and manicured lawns and neighbors who compared vacation homes at dinner parties. Rose had welcomed them with open arms. She cooked for them. She cleaned up after them. She stayed out of their way when they wanted privacy and stepped in whenever they needed help. She told herself this was simply what mothers did. What Rose did not expect was how quickly she would start to feel like a guest in her own home. Trevor and Julie rearranged the furniture without asking. They redecorated the living room in a style Rose did not recognize as her own. They spoke to her more like an employee than a mother, reminding her to keep the noise down, to keep the kitchen tidy, to make herself scarce when company came over. Rose noticed all of it. She said nothing. She told herself that family required patience, and that eventually things would go back to normal once Trevor and Julie moved into their own place. Then came the night of Trevor's birthday party. Rose had not been invited as a guest. She found that out the hard way when Julie handed her a list of appetizers to prepare and a schedule for when drinks needed to be refreshed. There was no conversation about it, no request. It was simply expected that Rose would spend her son's birthday working in her own kitchen while 20 guests she barely knew filled her living room with laughter and music. She did not argue. She put on an apron and got to work, telling herself that as long as Trevor was happy, none of the rest mattered. Later that evening, Rose carried a tray of wine glasses out to the guests. The living room was crowded, the lighting was dim, and, somewhere near the edge of the dining table, the leg of a chair had been pulled out further than usual. Rose did not see it. Her foot caught the leg and she stumbled, the tray tipping forward, wine spilling across the floor and splashing onto the hem of Julie's dress. The room went silent for a moment, and then Julie stood up so fast her own chair scraped loudly against the floor. Her face twisted with fury as she screamed at Rose in front of every single guest, calling her a filthy old hag. The words hung in the air. Conversation stopped. Someone's fork clattered against a plate. Rose stood there frozen, wine dripping from the tray in her hands, humiliation burning through her chest. She looked toward her son, waiting for him to say something, anything, in her defense. Instead, Trevor rose from his seat with an expression Rose had never seen on his face before. Not concern. Not embarrassment for his wife's outburst. Something colder. He told his own mother to get out of his house. For a moment, Rose could not speak. 30 years of memories in that house. 30 years of mortgage payments and roof repairs. And property taxes. 30 years of being the one who held everything together, and her son was standing in her living room telling her to leave. When she finally found her voice, it came out steady and calm, though her heart was pounding. She told him she would gladly leave, but he might want to check whose name was actually on the deed before he said another word. The room went quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Guests exchanged glances. Julie's face lost some of its fury and gained a flicker of confusion. Trevor opened his mouth, then closed it again, because he had no answer. He knew his mother was right. He had simply forgotten, or perhaps he had never truly considered it at all, that this was still her house. Rose set the tray down carefully on the counter, untied her apron, folded it, and walked upstairs without another word. She did not cry. She did not slam any doors. She simply closed her bedroom door quietly behind her and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall, thinking. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Rose asked herself a question she had never truly allowed herself to consider. What did she actually want out of the rest of her life? She thought about all the years she had spent putting Trevor first. She thought about the sacrifices she had made without complaint. The dreams she had quietly set aside because she believed a mother's role was to give everything to her children and expect nothing in return. She thought about the ocean. Rose had always dreamed of living somewhere by the water, somewhere quiet and warm, somewhere she could wake up to the sound of waves instead of the sound of someone else's expectations. She had mentioned it once or twice over the years, always followed by a laugh and a comment about how there was no time for dreams like that, while she still had a son to look after. Trevor had always come first. That night, sitting alone in her room while laughter and music continued to drift up from downstairs, Rose realized that Trevor was 35 years old. He was a grown man with a wife and a career. He did not need her the way he once had. The only person left in that house who still needed looking after was her. The next morning, Rose called a realtor. She did not mention anything to Trevor or Julie. She simply asked the realtor to come by while they were both at work and give her an honest assessment of the home's value. When the number came back, Rose sat in stunned silence for a long moment. 30 years of steady mortgage payments, careful upkeep, and a housing market that had shifted dramatically in her favor meant the house was worth far more than she had ever imagined. She listed it that same week, fully furnished, so there would be no need to deal with moving heavy furniture or emptying an entire house room by room. She packed only her clothing and a handful of personal items that meant something to her, things that could not be replaced. Photo albums, her late husband's watch, a small wooden box of letters. Everything else, she decided, could stay exactly where it was. The offer came in within days, well above asking price. Rose signed the papers without hesitation. While Trevor and Julie went about their daily routines completely unaware, Rose spent her evenings searching for a new home, somewhere far away from the life she had spent decades building for everyone, except herself. She found it in the form of an oceanfront villa in a quiet coastal town in Italy, white stucco walls, blue shutters, and a terrace that looked directly out over the water. She paid for it in cash using the proceeds from the sale of her home, and she booked a flight leaving in 2 days. She did not tell Trevor in person. She knew that if she tried, there would be arguments, guilt, promises to change that would likely be forgotten within weeks. Instead, on the morning of her flight, Rose wrote a note and left it on the kitchen island where she had once prepared thousands of meals for her family. The note explained that by the time Trevor and Julie read it, she would already be on her way to her new home. It explained that the house had been sold and that they had 30 days to vacate. It made clear that the furniture would remain with the house as part of the sale, and that if anything beyond their personal belongings went missing, it would be reported as stolen property. It stated plainly that Rose would not be contacting them again. She signed the note the same way Julie had addressed her in front of 20 guests. "Have a nice life. I know I will." Signed, the filthy old hag. Rose boarded her flight that afternoon with a lightness in her chest she had not felt in years. Somewhere over the ocean, 30,000 feet above the life she was leaving behind, she allowed herself to cry, not out of sadness, but out of relief. When she landed in Italy, the air smelled like salt water and citrus. Her villa sat exactly as the photographs had promised, terracotta roof tiles glowing in the afternoon sun, a terrace overlooking cliffs that dropped gently into the sea. Rose stood on that terrace on her very first evening, a glass of wine in her hand, watching the sun sink into the water, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt like herself again. Back home, Trevor and Julie found the note on the kitchen island exactly where Rose had left it. What followed was a frantic scramble of phone calls that went unanswered, messages that were never returned, and the slow, sinking realization that the life they had taken for granted was no longer theirs to take. They had 30 days to find a new place to live, and not a single item of furniture, not a single dish or photograph left hanging on the walls, belonged to them anymore. Rose never picked up the phone. She never replied to a single message. She spent her mornings walking along the shoreline collecting sea glass, her afternoons tending to a small garden of lemon trees on her terrace, and her evenings watching the sunset with a glass of wine. Exactly the way she had always dreamed of, but never allowed herself to have. She had spent 30 years putting everyone else first. She decided the years she had left belonged to her. If this story hit home for you, or if it reminded you of someone in your own life, let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next story.